everything! I told you to stay away!
God! You think this is my fault? You're the one who started it!
This letter proves everything. You lied to my face. I should have known better than to trust you.
I remember when things were simple. When it was just me and Luke. We grew up in the same neighborhood, spent our summers throwing rocks into the river, and shared secrets under the stars. Luke was my best friend. My brother. There was no one else I trusted more in this world. If you asked anyone, they'd say we were inseparable. We were always together, always had each other's backs. I guess I should have seen it coming. It's funny how you can be blind to the most obvious things when you're wrapped up in the comfort of someone's loyalty. But back then, I never doubted him. Not once. Luke and I did everything together. From school to late-night talks, to the stupid plans we made for the future. We had this dream of opening our own business, a little cafe that would serve the best coffee in town. Luke always said it was our thing, just the two of us. And I believed it. I believed him. I never even considered the possibility that things could fall apart. Not between us. Not after everything we'd been through. But then, that night, I was sitting in my apartment, half watching TV, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened the door, there he was, Luke. Standing there, like everything was normal. "Hey, man," he said, his voice a little too casual. He didn't look right, though. Something was off. His eyes weren't meeting mine. "You got a minute?" "Sure." "Come in," I said, stepping aside to let him in. He walked in, his hands in his pockets. He was avoiding my gaze, and that made me uneasy. Luke never avoided eye contact. "Something's up, isn't it?" I asked, closing the door behind him. "What's going on?" He hesitated for a second, then dropped the bombshell that shattered everything. "I've been working with," he stopped, swallowed hard. "I've been working with the guys from the other side, the ones who've been trying to shut you down. They've been paying me." I couldn't process the words. I blinked, hoping I misunderstood. But no. The truth was already sinking in, cold and heavy, like a stone in my chest. Luke, the one person I'd trusted with my life, had been betraying me. "You what?" My voice came out hoarse, like I was suffocating. I didn't want it to go this far, but he ran a hand through his hair, his face full of guilt and hesitation. "They promised me money. And a future. I didn't think it would hurt you this much." I was frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. The words didn't make sense. Luke, my best friend, the one person I'd thought I could always count on, had been working against me this entire time. It was a sick joke. I took a step back, trying to find my voice. "Why, Luke? Why would you do this to me? After everything?" I thought I was doing the right thing for myself," he said, voice shaky. "I'm sorry. I thought I could handle both sides, but He looked at me then, his eyes full of regret. "But it was too late for that." "You thought you could handle both sides?" I repeated, the words bitter on my tongue. "You sold me out for money?" For what? For a future that wasn't even real? Luke's face contorted with pain. I never meant for it to go this far. You just what, Luke? I interrupted, my voice rising. You just sold me out. You destroyed everything we had for a lie. You're a traitor. He flinched like I'd slapped him. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. What could he possibly say to fix this? There was no fixing it. I could feel the rage bubbling inside me, but I swallowed it down. Anger wouldn't change anything. Nothing could change what he had done. I don't want to hear it, I said, my voice quiet now. I took another step back, the space between us growing. I don't know who you are anymore, Luke. He stood there, silent, watching me like he was waiting for me to say something else. But I had nothing left to say. I turned away from him, unable to look at him any longer. The friendship I'd once cherished was gone. Shattered. I didn't know how to move on from this. How to trust again. Everything felt like a lie. I stood there in the silence, the weight of betrayal heavy on my chest, as I realized for the first time that I had no idea who Luke really was. And that thought was the hardest of all. I tried to sleep that night, but the images of Luke's face, his guilty eyes, his shaking hands, kept playing in my head. It was like a loop, a nightmare I couldn't escape from. I kept telling myself that maybe, just maybe, I'd misunderstood. Maybe he didn't really mean what he said. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized there was no denying the truth. Luke had betrayed me. The person I trusted more than anyone in this world had turned his back on me. I woke up the next morning with a pit in my stomach. The sun was barely up, and I hadn't gotten a full night's sleep. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, but I didn't bother picking it up. I knew who it was. I knew it was Luke trying to explain himself, trying to apologize, but I didn't want to hear it. I wasn't ready for that. I got dressed, went through the motions of my morning routine like everything was fine, but inside, I was a mess. I didn't know how to process the way I was feeling. Hurt. Betrayed. Angry. But above all, confused. How could I have missed the signs? Was I that blind? I tried to shake it off. I had to keep it together. But as soon as I stepped outside and caught sight of my phone again, I saw the missed calls. Luke had been calling me all morning. I finally picked up on the fourth ring. Luke, I said, my voice cold and detached. I couldn't bring myself to sound like myself. I didn't know who I was anymore. Please, his voice came through, strained and desperate. Can we talk? I know I screwed up, but I need you to understand. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. I let out a bitter laugh, my grip tightening on the phone. Understand? How am I supposed to understand that you've been lying to me this whole time? That you've been working with the people who want to ruin me? I never wanted to hurt you, he said quickly. I swear, I thought I could make it work. I never thought it would get this far. Then why didn't you tell me? I snapped. Why didn't you come to me before it all went down? Why did you have to go behind my back? He paused, then sighed. I didn't want to lose you. I thought I could fix things without you knowing. Fix things? I echoed, disbelief in my voice. By selling me out? I'm sorry. I thought I could make the right choice for once, but I was wrong. There was a long pause, and I could hear him breathing, his frustration mixing with guilt. I should have never gotten involved with them. But I'm trying to fix this, okay? Please, just. I cut him off. You've already ruined everything. There's no fixing this, Luke. I stood there, silence stretching between us, and I felt something inside me snap. I didn't know what to say anymore. I didn't even know what I was supposed to feel. I thought I knew him. I thought we had something real. But it was all a lie. Why didn't you tell me about the deal? I asked quietly, my voice trembling despite myself. Why didn't you just tell me from the start? I was afraid, Luke admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Afraid that you'd never forgive me. Afraid that I'd lose everything. I let out a shaky breath, my head spinning. You've already lost everything. You just don't realize it yet. I'm sorry, he said again, his voice cracking. I swear, I never meant for any of this to happen. I can't do this anymore, Luke, I said, the words finally slipping out of my mouth. I can't keep pretending like everything's fine. You've hurt me in a way I didn't think was possible. I know, he replied, his voice breaking. I know I can't take it back, but I'm asking for one chance to make things right. Please, just one chance. I looked out the window, my gaze unfocused as I tried to steady my racing heart. The world felt like it was closing in on me, everything shifting, nothing as it once was. I don't think I can ever trust you again, I said finally, my voice cold, though the pain was cutting through me like a knife. I don't think I can even look at you the same way. There was a long pause. I could feel his pain through the phone, but it didn't matter. Not anymore. I'm sorry, he whispered, his words almost lost in the static. I never wanted to hurt you. But I did. And with that, I hung up. The phone dropped from my hand like a dead weight. I stood there, staring at nothing in particular, the emptiness inside me swallowing me whole. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt this numb. I had to do something, anything to make it stop. But I didn't know what that was. I didn't know how to move on from this. I wasn't sure if I wanted revenge or just peace, but whatever it was, I knew one thing for sure, I'd never be the same again. And that realization? That realization was the hardest part of all. I spent the next few days in a daze. Work didn't feel real. I went through the motions, meeting with clients, answering emails, pretending like everything was normal, but inside, I was shattered. Every time I passed a familiar spot, I expected to see Luke standing there, waiting for me with one of his dumb jokes, or maybe just sitting silently with me, like we used to. But there was nothing. No Luke. No shared future. Just an empty space where trust used to live. I couldn't bring myself to reach out to him. After what he did, the idea of talking to him made my stomach churn. But the thing is, even though I hated him for what he'd done, there was still a part of me that wanted an explanation. I kept asking myself, why? Why didn't he come to me? Why didn't he trust me enough to talk it through? We'd shared everything for years, and now I couldn't even look at him without seeing a stranger. I stood by my window one afternoon, looking out over the city. The world felt so much smaller now. Everything seemed like a reminder of him, places we used to hang out, things we used to plan together. But none of it mattered anymore. I'd been betrayed by the one person who was supposed to have my back. I picked up my phone. It was a reflex. I didn't even know what I expected to find. More texts from Luke, probably. He hadn't stopped trying to reach me. There were dozens of missed calls and messages, each one more desperate than the last. I clicked on his latest message. I know I messed up. Please, just let me explain. I'm so sorry. Don't shut me out. I stared at the screen for a long time, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to type back, to let him explain himself. Maybe I could understand. Maybe I could forgive him. But another part of me, the part that had been burned, told me it was too late. What he did could never be undone, no matter how sorry he was. The thought of seeing him again made my skin crawl. The thought of hearing his voice, pleading with me, made my chest tighten. I didn't know if I could go through that again. I didn't know if I was strong enough to let him back in, even a little. A knock at my door pulled me from my thoughts. I opened it without thinking, and there he was. Luke. Standing in front of me, looking as if he'd just walked through hell. His eyes were red, his hands shaking, but he still stood there, like he had every right to be. I had to come, he said, his voice low, almost pleading. I can't just let you walk away from this. I stared at him, trying to keep my emotions in check. I wanted to scream, to push him away, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the desperation in his voice. Maybe it was the fact that we'd been through so much together. But I stood there, frozen. You don't get to just show up here, Luke, I said, finally finding my voice. You've already made your choice. Don't act like you can just walk in and make it all better. I know, he whispered, his head hanging in shame. I know I can't fix it. But I want to try. I can't lose you. Please, I need you to listen. I stepped back, looking at him with a mix of anger and hurt. Listen to what? That you messed up? That you destroyed everything we built together for a paycheck? You're not the person I thought you were. You're just another liar. He flinched at my words, but I didn't care. The pain was still too fresh. The betrayal still cut like a knife in my chest. I was scared, he said, his voice breaking. I didn't think I had any other way out. They promised me everything, and I believed them. But I wasn't thinking straight. I didn't think about how much I was risking. I didn't think about you. Of course, you didn't think about me, I shot back, frustration boiling over. You thought about yourself. You thought about your future, your money. You didn't think about the fact that you were tearing down everything we had. You didn't think about the fact that you were destroying me. I was shaking now, my words coming faster than I could control. Do you even understand how much you've hurt me? Do you even realize that I trusted you with my life, Luke? And now I don't even know who you are anymore. I'm sorry, he whispered again, his voice barely audible. I know that doesn't change anything, but I am. I never wanted to hurt you. Then why did you, Luke? I said, my voice cracking. Why did you choose them over me? He looked at me, his face full of guilt, but I didn't want to see it anymore. The weight of his regret wasn't enough to make me forget everything he'd done. I didn't know what else to do, he said softly. I thought I could control it. I thought I could get out before it was too late. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. That's the thing, Luke. You thought you could play both sides and get away with it. You never once thought about what it would do to me. He didn't respond. He just stood there, looking lost, like a shell of the person I used to know. And for the first time, I realized something. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about me. I had a choice to make. I could walk away, cut him out of my life completely, and try to rebuild what was left of me. Or I could let him back in, let him explain, and risk being hurt all over again. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't make that decision for him. I couldn't fix this. It was beyond fixing. I need time, Luke, I said, finally finding my voice again. I need space to think about this. About everything. He nodded slowly, his face a mix of relief and sorrow. "I'll wait," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll wait as long as you need. I'm not going anywhere." I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. I just closed the door, standing there with my back pressed against it, trying to catch my breath. I had no idea what my next step would be. But one thing was clear, I couldn't keep living in the past. And I couldn't keep letting him pull me back in. I had to make a choice. A bitter one. And no matter what I decided, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The betrayal, the lies, the way Luke had torn everything apart. I thought it was bad enough when I first found out. The shock. The heartbreak. The anger. But as I started to replay everything in my head, I realized something. The betrayal wasn't an isolated incident. It wasn't just that one moment that shattered everything. It was something much deeper. Something that had been building for years. I spent days, maybe even weeks, going over every detail of my relationship with Luke. Every conversation. Every encounter. At first, I thought I was just torturing myself, trying to make sense of the chaos. But then, I started to notice the small things. The things I had brushed off. The lies I'd ignored. It wasn't until I was sitting in my apartment one night, scrolling through old messages and photos, that I saw it clearly. I found a picture of us, Luke and me, standing together at a friend's party. We were both smiling, looking carefree, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I started to scroll back through the conversations we'd had, and that's when it hit me. There had always been little things, little cracks in the foundation. I just didn't see them. I didn't want to see them. I found messages where Luke had been evasive about things, where he'd lied about his whereabouts, where he'd made excuses for not being there for me. At the time, I just thought he was busy, or maybe I was being too demanding. But now, looking at it all, I saw the truth. The lies. The manipulation. The slow poison that had been creeping in unnoticed, until it finally destroyed everything. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen in front of me, the weight of it all sinking in. I had been blind. Not because I didn't want to see it, but because I had refused to. For years, I had convinced myself that everything was fine. I had convinced myself that Luke and I were solid, that our friendship was unbreakable. But that wasn't true, was it? The more I uncovered, the more I began to question my own judgment. How could I have been so stupid? How could I have missed all the signs? I thought about all the times he'd made excuses, all the times he'd shut me out, all the times he'd let me down. And still, I had made excuses for him. I had believed him, trusted him. But now, I was left with the bitter reality that I had been living in a fantasy. My relationship with Luke hadn't been as perfect as I had convinced myself it was. I wasn't as blind as I thought, I had simply refused to acknowledge the truth. As I sat there, I began to wonder about everything else in my life. Had I always been this naive? Had I always ignored the signs of trouble, of lies, of betrayal? I couldn't stop myself from questioning everything. From questioning everyone. Was I that easily fooled? Or had I just built up this ideal version of the world around me, only to watch it crumble when the truth finally came crashing down? It wasn't just Luke. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was everything. My whole view of the world had been shattered. I had believed in loyalty, in trust, in honesty. But now, I wasn't so sure anymore. Maybe I had been too idealistic. Maybe I had been too trusting. Maybe I had put too much faith in people who didn't deserve it. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I had changed. How much I had been forced to change. This whole experience, this heartbreak, had opened my eyes to the harsh realities of life. It had forced me to see the cracks in my own judgment, the flaws in my perception of the world. It had forced me to accept that not everyone is who they seem, not everyone can be trusted, and not every friendship is as solid as it appears. I felt a deep sense of loss, not just for what Luke had done, but for everything that I had lost in the process. My trust. My innocence. My belief in the goodness of people. I had been so sure of everything before. So sure that the world was black and white. But now, I was left with nothing but shades of gray. I thought about the future. About how I would move on from this. Would I ever trust anyone again? Would I ever be able to believe in the kind of friendship I once had with Luke? Could I ever go back to the person I was before this all happened? The answers didn't come easy. I wasn't sure I even had the answers yet. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living in the past. I couldn't keep looking back at the way things used to be, because I would never get those days back. What I needed now was to figure out how to move forward, how to rebuild my life, how to learn to trust again. But as I sat there, staring at the pieces of my past scattered around me, I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't the same person anymore. And maybe, just maybe, that wasn't such a bad thing. The days blurred together after my conversation with Luke. I spent a lot of time in my head, replaying every moment we'd shared. I would sit on my couch, staring at the walls, my thoughts drifting back to memories of him. There was always a smile on his face, always a joke on his lips. How could that person, the one I'd trusted so completely, be capable of the betrayal he'd handed me? It was impossible to shake the feeling of his presence in every corner of my life. There were places, small things, that reminded me of him. A song that came on the radio, a street we used to walk down together, each one made my chest tighten. I hadn't realized how much of my life was tied to him until I was forced to untangle it all. I couldn't keep living like this, stuck in the past. But no matter how hard I tried, the past wouldn't let go of me. I needed to face it. I needed to confront the ghosts that lingered in the spaces Luke and I once shared. The only way I could move forward was to let go of the past. But how? I found myself driving to the park where we used to hang out. It was a place that had always felt like ours. It was a quiet spot near a small lake, surrounded by trees. We used to sit there for hours, talking about everything and nothing. The air felt heavy as I walked through the park, the sound of the wind rustling the leaves above me making the place feel oddly empty. I sat on the same bench where Luke and I had spent so many afternoons. The same spot where we used to talk about our futures, about dreams that seemed so real back then. Now, all those conversations felt like they came from a different life. I closed my eyes, letting the memories wash over me. For a moment, I almost wished things could go back to how they were. But that wasn't possible. Luke had changed everything. I couldn't forget what he had done. I couldn't forget the look in his eyes when he admitted everything. I couldn't forget how he tore apart everything we built. Do you think we'll ever get over this? I muttered aloud, though I wasn't talking to anyone. Just to the empty space beside me. The answer came as a soft whisper in the wind: no. No, I wouldn't. Not fully. Not unless I could find a way to heal. But that healing wasn't going to come from sitting here, reminiscing about the past. It was time to let go. I stood up and looked around the park one last time. It was time to leave the ghosts behind. But as I walked away, I couldn't help but feel like I was walking away from a part of myself. The next day, I ran into Sarah at the cafe. I hadn't seen her in weeks. She was a reminder of the person I was before all of this. Before Luke's betrayal had taken over my life. She greeted me with a small, understanding smile, her eyes scanning my face like she knew exactly what had been weighing on me. "Hey," she said softly, her voice warm but cautious. "You doing all right?" I hesitated, not sure how to answer. The truth was, I wasn't all right. But Sarah had always been a good listener, and I found myself sitting down with her, letting the silence stretch before finally speaking. "I don't know, Sarah," I said, the words coming out heavier than I expected. "I don't know how to move on from this. I feel like everything I knew about myself is shattered. Like everything I thought was real doesn't matter anymore." She nodded, her gaze sympathetic but steady. "You're going through something no one should ever have to. But you can't keep holding on to him, to the past. You're not that person anymore." I shook my head. "I don't even know who I am now. How do I just let go of everything we were? Everything I thought we were?" "You're stronger than you realize," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "You've already survived worse. And you can survive this. But you can't keep holding on to the ghost of Luke. He's not worth it." The words stung, but they were the truth. I couldn't keep living in the shadow of the past. I needed to rebuild, even if I didn't know where to start. Later that night, I found myself in the familiar rhythm of my apartment, alone, with only my thoughts. I poured myself a drink and sat by the window, staring out at the city lights. The world felt so distant, like I was watching life from behind a glass wall. My phone buzzed on the table. Luke. Again. I couldn't stop myself from picking it up, even though I knew it would just bring more pain. "Hey, I know it's been a while, but I need to talk to you." His voice came through the phone, sounding more desperate than I'd ever heard him. "Please. Can we just meet? I know I messed up, but I ended the call before he could finish. I wasn't ready for this. Not yet. But I knew what I had to do. I had to stop waiting for him to fix things. I had to stop waiting for an apology that would never be enough. I had to fix this for myself. And I couldn't do that while still holding on to what had already been broken." I took another long drink and let out a slow breath. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure: I was done being stuck in the past. It was time to move forward, even if I didn't have a clear path ahead. Tomorrow, I would start letting go. But tonight? Tonight, I would face the ghosts of the past head-on, and begin the long, hard process of healing. And maybe, just maybe, I would finally be able to forgive myself. It had been weeks since I last saw Luke. Weeks since I heard his voice, since I felt the sting of his betrayal. But even though I had kept my distance, the pain hadn't faded. It still lingered like a constant weight on my chest, pressing down every time I thought about him. I'd tried to move on, to pretend like I was okay, but there was no pretending anymore. I couldn't avoid him forever. I knew that. Eventually, we'd have to face each other. And when that moment came, I wanted to be ready. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but I wasn't expecting what happened that night. It was late, and I was sitting in my living room, scrolling through my phone, when I heard the knock at my door. My heart skipped a beat. I knew who it was before I even got up to answer it. The way the world seemed to shift in that moment, the weight of everything, the tension in the air, it could only be him. I opened the door, and there he was. Luke. He looked like hell, tired, worn down, like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were puffy, and his hair was messy, like he'd been running his hands through it in frustration. But even so, there was something different about him. Something raw. Something broken. "I need to talk to you," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. There was no arrogance in it, no pride. Only desperation. "Not again," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. I crossed my arms, standing in the doorway. I wasn't ready for this. I didn't want to see him. Not like this. Not when I was still so angry. "I know you don't want to hear it," he said, lowering his gaze. "I know I screwed up. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I can't live with this anymore. I need you to understand why I did it." I stared at him, feeling the anger and hurt rise up inside me. Every word he said just dug the knife in deeper. He wanted me to understand? After everything? After everything he'd done? Understand? I said, my voice rising. "You want me to understand why you destroyed everything we had? You want me to understand why you chose money over loyalty? Over friendship?" "I didn't think it would be like this," he said, his voice cracking. "I thought I could control it. I thought I could make it work and not hurt you. But I was wrong, okay? I know I was. I just—" "Shut up," I snapped, cutting him off. "You don't get to stand here and tell me you thought you could control it. You don't get to lie to me anymore, Luke. I'm done with your excuses." Luke's eyes flickered with pain, but he didn't look away. He took a deep breath, his shoulders slumping. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I swear, I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was protecting us. I didn't see how bad it would get." "Stop!" I shouted, my hands balling into fists at my sides. "I don't want to hear it anymore. You don't get to make excuses for what you did. You don't get to act like I'm supposed to just forgive you." His eyes widened, and he took a step back. I could see the regret in his expression, but it was too late for that. It was too late for apologies. I was so sick of hearing him apologize, over and over, as if that would somehow fix everything. But it wouldn't. Nothing would. Not after what he did. "I was wrong," he said, his voice trembling. "And I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But I don't want to lose you. Please, don't shut me out like this. We were brothers, man. We were supposed to be brothers." I couldn't breathe. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. We were supposed to be brothers. The thing I kept holding on to, the thing I kept telling myself, we were supposed to be brothers. But now that meant nothing. Now that meant nothing at all. "I don't know who you are anymore," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "You're not the person I thought I knew. And that hurts more than anything." Luke's face fell, and for a moment, he looked like a ghost, empty, lost. "I didn't want to hurt you. You have to believe me." "I don't believe you anymore," I said, the finality of my words hitting me harder than I expected. "I trusted you, Luke. You were the one person I thought I could count on. And you shattered that trust. I can't just pick up the pieces and pretend everything's okay. I can't just forget what you did." He stepped forward again, but this time, I didn't back down. I stood my ground, staring him down. His eyes were full of pain, but there was nothing left for me to give him. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry." And that was it. The last thing he said. No more words could change anything. No more apologies, no more promises. It was over. I shook my head slowly, the weight of everything finally settling over me. You should have thought about that before you destroyed everything. I turned away, unable to look at him anymore. The room felt too small, too suffocating. The man I had once called my best friend was now a stranger, and no apology could fix that. Luke didn't say anything else. He just stood there, silent, as I walked away. I could hear him lingering in the doorway for a moment, like he was waiting for me to change my mind. But I didn't. I couldn't. The door clicked shut behind me, and I stood there, my back pressed against it, taking in the silence. The emptiness. I'd done it. I'd finally told him what I needed to say. And it hurt more than I expected. But there was no going back. There was no fixing this. And maybe, just maybe, that was the hardest part to accept. But I wasn't broken anymore. I wasn't the person I was before. I was stronger than that. The breaking point had come. And now, I had to figure out how to put the pieces of my life back together. I spent the following days trying to keep my distance, keeping my thoughts from spiraling into the dark places they usually went whenever I allowed myself to linger on Luke's betrayal. But the truth was, I couldn't stop thinking about him. Even after everything, even after the final confrontation, his face still lingered in my mind. The regret. The desperation. The hollow apology that meant nothing in the grand scheme of things. But as much as I hated to admit it, I was tired. Tired of feeling like I was constantly drowning in this mess he'd created. Tired of being angry. Tired of waiting for an apology that would never come. And the thing that gnawed at me the most was how powerless I felt. Every day felt like I was walking through life with a weight I couldn't get rid of. So, I did what I knew best. I kept busy. I threw myself into my work, trying to push the thoughts of Luke out of my head. But every time I thought I was starting to forget, there was always something, a song, a place, a memory, that would pull me right back into the mess. It wasn't until the following week that I began to see things shift. And it wasn't because Luke was suddenly remorseful. It wasn't because we'd had some heart-to-heart conversation. No, it was something else. Something far more satisfying. I had learned to stop reacting to him. Instead, I started to focus on what was truly important, myself. And that's when I realized that I didn't need Luke's approval or his apology to feel whole again. The pieces of my life didn't need him to be complete. What I needed was to take control. And in doing so, I realized something. If Luke had wanted to destroy me, then maybe it was time for me to let him see how it felt when the tables were turned. So, I started quietly watching. I watched as the deals he'd worked so hard to build began to unravel. I knew the people he'd been working with, the ones who'd promised him a future at my expense. They weren't exactly the type to leave things alone when their interests weren't being met. I didn't need to lift a finger. The weight of his own choices would be his undoing. It was like a sick kind of satisfaction. I didn't need to be the one to bring him down. Life, karma, whatever you wanted to call it, was doing that for me. I didn't make any moves directly. I didn't have to. The more I watched, the more I realized I didn't need to do anything to get my revenge. It was already happening. Slowly, Luke's world began to crumble. The business deals he'd secured with people who had no loyalty to him began to sour. One by one, the partnerships he'd fought so hard for were slipping through his fingers. I found myself feeling something strange. A quiet sense of power. Not in a way that made me feel good, but in a way that made me realize something I hadn't understood before. Luke wasn't the one in control. I was. One night, I was walking home after another long day when I ran into Tom, one of the people Luke had worked with. He was standing outside a bar, looking nervous, like he was waiting for something or someone. "Tom," I said, trying to mask the bitterness in my voice. "What's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost." He looked up, startled, and for a second, I thought he might just walk away. But then he sighed, shaking his head. "I don't know, man. Something's off. The whole thing's falling apart. You heard about the deal with the investors, right?" I nodded, though I wasn't exactly sure which deal he meant. There had been so many. "Yeah, I've heard." "Well, let me tell you something. Luke's in over his head," Tom said, his voice low. "We're all pulling back from him. People don't want to be associated with someone who can't keep their promises." A small, cruel smile tugged at my lips. "Sounds like karma's doing its job." Tom shrugged. "You're right about that. But I didn't come here to talk about Luke. I came because I wanted to apologize. For everything. For not seeing what was happening. I never should have sided with him." I didn't respond at first. What was there to say? That he'd been just as complicit in everything? Or that he didn't deserve my forgiveness either? No. What I realized was that it didn't matter. None of it mattered anymore. "You don't have to apologize," I said, finally meeting his gaze. "It's already too late for that." He looked like he wanted to say something more, but I didn't give him the chance. I turned, walking away from him without a second glance. There was nothing more to say. The damage was done, and there was no fixing it. The next few days were a blur, and as I kept my distance from Luke, I began to notice the small things, like how his business meetings kept getting rescheduled or cancelled. How people who once admired him began to back away, one by one. How he started drinking more, showing up in public less. Slowly but surely, the empire he'd built was slipping through his fingers, and there was nothing I had to do to make it happen. It felt good. Not in the way I had imagined revenge would feel, but in a deeper, quieter way. It was the satisfaction of knowing that he was finally facing the consequences of his choices. I wasn't the one who destroyed him. He did that all on his own. But that didn't stop me from watching. It didn't stop me from enjoying the slow unraveling of his life. The thing about karma is, it always catches up to you. And when it did, I was there, watching from the sidelines, knowing that I didn't need to lift a finger. This wasn't about getting even. It was about justice. And justice, in the end, came without me having to do a damn thing. I knew the moment I saw Luke again that something had changed. He looked different. Broken. Like a man who had been running from his own mistakes for so long that he had no idea how to face them anymore. The once confident, self-assured person I used to know was now a shadow of his former self. His clothes were rumpled, his eyes hollowed out with exhaustion. He looked as if the weight of his actions had crushed him. I found him standing outside a coffee shop one morning, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the ground. I almost didn't recognize him at first. The transformation was so drastic. It made me realize how far he had fallen, and how little of it had to do with anything I'd done. When I saw him, I felt a knot tighten in my chest. Part of me wanted to walk away, to keep pretending like I wasn't affected by his presence. But there was something about the way he stood there, so broken, that made it impossible to ignore. He wasn't the person I used to call my best friend. No. He wasn't even a shadow of that person anymore. But he was still someone. "Luke," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. He looked up slowly, as if he had expected someone else, not me. When his eyes met mine, I saw the same desperation, the same guilt that had been written all over his face the last time we spoke. He swallowed hard, stepping toward me like he wasn't sure whether he should even approach. "I know you don't want to see me," he said, his voice hoarse. "But I don't want to hear it." I cut him off before he could say more. I had heard every apology before, and they never meant anything. It was just words. Words I didn't need anymore. "You've already said everything you could say." His face fell, the hint of a tear brimming in the corner of his eye, but he quickly wiped it away. He was a mess, completely undone by the weight of his own decisions. "I've lost everything, haven't I?" I didn't answer at first. What was there to say? The truth was, he had. The people who used to support him, the business deals that had once been his lifeblood, they were all gone. No one wanted to be tied to a man who had proven himself so unreliable. But even though he had brought this on himself, part of me still felt the sting of what could have been. What we could have been. "I'm sorry," he whispered again, his voice breaking. "I wish I could take it all back. But I can't. And now I'm left with nothing. I don't even know who I am anymore." "You never knew who you were," I said, my voice low and cutting. "You were always someone who thought you could play both sides. Someone who thought he could get away with it. And look where that's gotten you now." He nodded slowly, like the words were sinking in for the first time. "I know," he said quietly. "I've messed everything up. And I don't know how to fix it." "You can't," I said flatly. "There's no fixing this. Not for you, not for me. You broke something that can't be repaired." Luke seemed to shrink into himself, his shoulders sagging. It was like all the fight had left his body. He stood there for a long moment, just staring at me, and I realized something. He wasn't just facing the consequences of his actions. He was losing himself in the process. He wasn't the man I'd known, and the more I looked at him, the more I realized he might never be that man again. "Please," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm begging you. I don't have anyone left. I don't know what to do without you. Please. Can't we just start over?" I felt the bitterness rise in my throat, but I swallowed it down. He didn't deserve my pity. He didn't deserve my forgiveness, not after everything he'd done. I had learned to let go of that. I had learned to stop caring about what happened to him because I couldn't fix him anymore. "You had your chance," I said, my words final. "And you blew it. You didn't just lose me, Luke. You lost yourself. And there's no coming back from that." His face crumpled, and I saw the ghost of the person I used to call my best friend flash in his eyes. But that person was gone. And deep down, I knew that no matter how sorry he was, no matter how much he regretted it, it wouldn't be enough. "You'll figure it out," I said, turning to walk away. "But I'm not your solution." I didn't look back as I walked away. Part of me wanted to feel something more for him, some semblance of the friendship we used to have. But that was gone. That was long gone. And in the end, I realized that I didn't need to feel sorry for him. I didn't need to be the one who carried the weight of his mistakes. He had to face the consequences of his actions, just like everyone else. The empire he'd tried to build, the lies he'd told, everything was crumbling around him, and he was the only one who could rebuild it. And so, I left him there, standing in the ruins of his own making, knowing that it was his fall, not mine. The truth was, I had already moved on. It was over. He was gone, and I was finally free. That was the hardest thing I'd ever had to accept, and the most liberating. The weight that had hung over me for so long finally began to lift. It didn't happen all at once, but slowly, day by day, I started to feel like myself again. I wasn't the same person I was before Luke betrayed me, but maybe that was a good thing. Maybe it was the catalyst I needed to finally step out from the shadows of my past and become someone new. I threw myself into work, into my own projects, things I'd always put on the back burner while I focused on the life I had built with Luke. It felt good to create something for myself again. For the first time in a long while, I could see a future that didn't include him, and it felt freeing. It was a strange feeling, standing on my own. The loneliness wasn't as crushing as I thought it would be. In fact, it felt like a kind of peace I hadn't known I needed. I'd always defined myself through my relationships with other people, especially Luke. But now, I was learning to define myself based on who I was, not who I was with. One night, after a long day of meetings and plans, I found myself sitting alone at a bar, nursing a drink in silence. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses buzzed around me, but I wasn't really paying attention. My thoughts were elsewhere, on the life I was building, on the things I had left behind, on the future. It felt like I was finally standing on my own 2 feet, no longer tethered to the past. "Mind if I join you?" I looked up to see Sarah standing there, a tentative smile on her face. I hadn't seen her much lately. It had been hard to focus on anything outside of the mess with Luke, but now I was starting to find balance again. "Sure," I said, shifting over so she could sit down beside me. She ordered a drink and we settled into comfortable silence for a few moments. I could tell she was waiting for me to say something, but I didn't know what. So much had happened, and it felt like everything had changed, yet at the same time, nothing had. I wasn't sure where to start. "You look better," she finally said, breaking the silence. I chuckled lightly, not sure whether it was a compliment or an observation. "I feel better. Or at least, I'm getting there." Sarah looked at me for a moment, her eyes soft, understanding. "I'm glad. You've been through a lot, and I think you're stronger for it." I stared into my drink, swirling it slowly. "I don't feel strong. I just feel different." "Different can be good," she said with a small smile. "You know, sometimes it's the hardest things that help us grow. I think this is just the beginning of something new for you." I nodded, the weight of her words settling over me. "Maybe. But I've realized something over the past few weeks. I can't keep holding on to the past. I can't keep blaming myself for what happened with Luke. He made his choices. I made mine." "Exactly," Sarah said, her voice steady. "And now it's time for you to make a choice. What do you want your life to look like now? What do you want to be?" That was the question I had been avoiding for so long. What did I want? What did I want for myself? The answer wasn't as clear-cut as I hoped it would be. But as I sat there, feeling the cool glass in my hand, I realized something. I wanted to rebuild. I wanted to do something for myself. I wanted to build a future that didn't revolve around the wreckage of what had been. "I don't know exactly," I said, finally meeting her gaze. "But I know I'm not going to let this define me. I'm not going to let what happened with Luke control my life." "Good," she said, smiling. "Because you deserve so much more than that." For the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope. It wasn't a fire yet, but it was something. A small, quiet determination. I was going to rebuild my life, piece by piece. And I was going to do it on my terms. The days turned into weeks, and as I threw myself into my work, I started to see the changes. I wasn't just rebuilding my career, I was rebuilding myself. I started taking chances I wouldn't have before. I began making decisions based on what I wanted, not what I thought I was supposed to do. I met new people, people who didn't know about my past with Luke. They didn't see the broken version of me that I had been. They only saw the person I was becoming. And as time passed, I realized that the scars from my past weren't things I needed to hide. They were a part of me, yes, but they didn't define me. I was learning to accept the things I couldn't change and move forward with the strength I had found in the aftermath. One day, I was sitting in my office, staring at a proposal for a new project when I received a message. It was from Luke. I hadn't heard from him in weeks, and I'd almost forgotten about him. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted to say thank you. For everything you taught me. I'm sorry. I've finally started facing the consequences of my actions. And I hope one day, we can both find peace. I stared at the message for a long time, my mind racing. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to feel. Part of me wanted to reach out, to offer some kind of closure, but the other part of me knew that it was over. I wasn't the same person anymore. And neither was he. I deleted the message without responding. I didn't need to engage with the past anymore. I had found my own way forward. And that was enough. I spent the next few months continuing to build my life. The pain of the betrayal was still there, but it was fading, replaced by something better. Something stronger. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. I wasn't the person I was before. I wasn't the person who relied on others for validation. I was someone who had learned to trust himself again. And maybe, just maybe, that was the most important thing of all. And as I sat in my office, watching the city outside my window, I realized that the future was mine to shape. I was free. Time had a funny way of making things feel distant, like they belonged to another lifetime. The memories of Luke, of everything that had happened, still lingered, but they no longer had the power to consume me. Every day that passed brought me further away from the version of myself I was before the betrayal, before the anger, before the heartbreak. And slowly, I was learning to appreciate who I was becoming. I had carved out a new life for myself. A life that was mine, one that I didn't have to share with anyone who didn't truly deserve to be part of it. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I was learning to embrace the quiet moments, the small victories, the relationships that had started to bloom after the wreckage of my past. But even now, there were moments when the past came rushing back. A name. A place. A memory. And for just a second, I'd feel that familiar pang in my chest, that echo of what had been lost. It wasn't easy to move on from someone who had once meant everything to you. It wasn't easy to look back and not feel like you were losing a part of yourself in the process. And then came the final message. It arrived on a cold, gray afternoon. I was sitting at my desk, scanning through emails, when I saw the notification. A message from Luke. My first instinct was to ignore it. To pretend it never happened. But I knew, deep down, that I couldn't just let it slip by without acknowledging it. We had been through too much for me to turn my back completely. I opened the message. I don't know if you'll ever read this. But I need to say it. I've done a lot of thinking. I've made a lot of mistakes. And the biggest one was losing you. I can never take back what I did, but I want you to know that I am sorry. I know that doesn't change anything, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I hope that, one day, you can look back and remember the good times. Not the bad. I sat there staring at the screen, the words swimming before my eyes. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I just felt nothing. Empty. but not in a bad way. More like the final threads of something that had been tangled for so long were finally coming undone. I hadn't realized until that moment that this message was the closure I'd been waiting for. Not the kind of closure where you get answers, or where the other person apologizes and everything magically falls into place. No, this was the kind of closure where I finally accepted that some things don't need to be fixed. Some things, like relationships and people, just end. And you have to learn to move forward with or without them. I took a deep breath, the weight of it all pressing in on me. I wasn't going to respond. I didn't need to. The words weren't important anymore. The apology wasn't going to change the fact that everything was different now. The truth was, we had both moved on. He was living his own life, dealing with his own consequences, and I was doing the same. I realized something as I sat there, staring at that message, that it didn't even sting anymore. I had forgiven him a long time ago. Not because he deserved it, but because I deserved to let go. I had spent so much of my life carrying that anger, that bitterness, but it no longer had a hold on me. I hit the delete button. And just like that, it was over. I leaned back in my chair, letting out a slow breath. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I'd finally freed myself from the past, finally let go of the weight that had been holding me down for so long. There was no dramatic confrontation, no grand gesture of forgiveness. There was no redemption arc. There was just me, standing on my own, having learned the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes, the best thing you can do is walk away. And in walking away, you find your own strength. The rest of the evening passed in a blur, but it felt different somehow. Lighter. The future seemed a little more open, a little more full of possibilities. I was free to live the life I wanted, on my own terms. And that was enough. I didn't need closure from Luke. I didn't need anything from him anymore. What I needed was to embrace the life I was building, the life I deserved. A life free from the shadows of betrayal. As I stood up from my desk and looked out the window, the city lights flickering in the distance, I realized that I wasn't looking back anymore. I had nothing left to look back on. I was finally moving forward. And that was the most freeing feeling in the world.